The April uprising of 1876 ended with a shocking human tragedy, in which over 30,000 Bulgarians were massacred by the Bashabalzuks and the regular Ottoman army. More than 80 Bulgarian villages were razed to the ground, leaving tens of thousands of families homeless. The brutality of the repression echoed in the world press through reports that shook the conscience of all of Europe.
The Bashabalzuk were irregular units of the Ottoman army who did not receive a salary or uniforms, and their only reward was the right to unlimited plunder. As a result, the Ottoman authorities even awarded their leaders medals instead of punishing them. Nevertheless, the April uprising achieved its main goal. The Bulgarian question is placed on the world agenda. At the conference in Constantinople, the great powers demand reforms and delineate the borders of two autonomous Bulgarian provinces. One centered in Tarnovo and the other in Sofia, covering almost all the lands later recognized in San Stefano, including Macedonia and Nis. However, the Sublime Porte categorically refused, and war became inevitable. On the 24th of April, 1877, in Chisinau, in front of a 20,000-strong army and the 1st Bulgarian Volunteers, the manifesto of Emperor Alexander II, declaring war on the Ottoman Empire, was solemnly read and met with powerful support from the Russian people. Meanwhile, thousands of Bulgarian volunteers flocked to Ploiesti, where the first 6 battalions were stationed, formed with over 7,000 soldiers, each of whom received their own battle flag. The 1st Battalion receives the flag sewn by the women of Gorna Oryahovica for the April uprising, a flag that, albeit belatedly, will finally fly freely over the Balkans. The flag of the 3rd Battalion, a gift from the citizens of Samara, was solemnly consecrated on May 6th. Its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pavel Kalitin, swore to defend the flag with his life. The event was attended by Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, the Emperor and No. 39's brother and Commander-in-Chief of the Balkan Army. By mid-June, Emperor Alexander II arrived in Ploiesti as the final preparations reached their peak. General Nikolai Obruchev developed a plan for a lightning war, relying on a decisive strike across the Danube and a quick passage through the Balkans to avoid a grueling positional war around the fortified quadrilateral of Silistra, Rus, Shumen, and Varna. Coastal artillery, strategically located near Giurgiu and Brila, began a systematic bombardment of the Turkish fortresses, paralyzing communication between the Turkish garrisons and diverting attention. Russian sappers carried out massive mining of the river with electric and contact mines, laid under the cover of night. On the eve of the landing, a complete information blackout was imposed. Correspondents were isolated, and the movement of civilians along the border was strictly restricted. And so, on the evening of June 26th, the Danube remained silent and motionless in anticipation. On June 27th, at exactly 2:00 and 39 o'clock in the morning, the true chronology of freedom begins. Near Zimnica, the Danube Bank became the starting point for the largest Russian amphibious operation to date. Under the command of General Mikhail Dragomirov, the 14th Infantry Division began crossing the river. The tactic relied on complete surprise. Over 600 oared pontoons were used, transporting the troops in 7 waves. The Turkish garrison of 10,000 soldiers under the command of Ahmed Hamdi Pasha was caught off guard despite strong coastal fortifications. This masterpiece of military action remains in world history as the first major night landing across a massive river barrier. The operation set a new standard in military engineering by rapidly constructing bridge structures over a kilometer long under the threat of a modern armored fleet, making this success a unique precedent for the era. By the end of the day, the bridge between the two banks was complete.
The successful crossing allowed over 150,000 Russian soldiers and huge quantities of military cargo to be transferred across the Danube in less than 2 weeks. The strategic result is colossal. The operational path to Tarnovo and the Balkans is open, and Pleven and Rus are isolated from each other. Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, the commander-in-chief, set foot on the Bulgarian coast that same day with a solemn prayer and personally assumed operational control of the march into the interior of the country. The battle for Svishtov was fierce and fought at the point of bayonets. Russian losses in this first clash reached 812 killed and wounded, while the Turkish forces lost about 600 men. Svishtov became the first free territory where the foundations of the civil administration of New Bulgaria were laid. The advance was accompanied by an unprecedented national upsurge. Western correspondents wrote with admiration that the peasants came out with entire carts full of bread, wine, and fruit, strewing the path of the cavalry with flowers. Thousands of Bulgarians joined as scouts and guides, leading Russian units along secret paths that did not exist on official topographic maps. After the success at Svishtov, the center of gravity shifted to the village of Dolny Dubnik. There, in the temporary headquarters, Emperor Alexander II and General Nikolai Oberchov made the strategic decision to divide the forces into 3 operational detachments with radically different tactical tasks. The Western Detachment, led by General Nikolai Kredaner, was tasked with neutralizing the fortresses of Nikopol and Pleven. The Eastern Detachment, the largest, with 70,000 soldiers, was entrusted to Crown Prince Alexander Alexandrovich. Its mission was defensive, but critically important, to serve as an iron curtain against Mehmed Ali Pasha and No. 39's 100,000-strong army. Without this shield, the Turkish army could strike in the rear any Russian advance towards the Balkans. The most dynamic task was entrusted to the vanguard of General Joseph Gurko. Using the tactics of the flying column, he liberated Tarnovo on July 7th, where Prince Nikolai Nikolaevich made a ceremonial entry a few days later. With only 12,000 soldiers, including 10 squadrons and the first 7,500 Bulgarian volunteers, Gurko must carry out a lightning raid into the Balkan mountains. The goal is to control the key passes and bring the war to Thrace. By entering Kazanlak on July 17th and capturing the Shipka Pass 2 days later, Gurko established strategic control over the central connections between northern and southern Bulgaria. Meanwhile, the Western Detachment moved towards Pleven, entering a dramatic race against time. Osman Pasha made a forced march from Vidin, covering 200 kilometers in just days and outpacing the Russian vanguard by fatal hours. This delay cost the Russian army 5 months of agony and tens of thousands of casualties. On July 20th, the first attack on Pleven ended in disaster. The Russian force of 8,600 men was repulsed by 13,000 well-entrenched Turkish soldiers, leaving 2,400 killed and wounded on the battlefield. Some Russian regiments even managed to reach the outskirts of the city before being repulsed with heavy losses. 10 days later, on July 30th, the second attack was even bloodier. 32,000 soldiers were thrown against 25,000 defenders. But the massive use of rapid-fire Winchester rifles turned the space in front of the redoubts into an impassable zone of death. 7,300 soldiers were killed or wounded, compared to about 1,200 on the Turkish side. In this chaos, the local population rushed to help. The Bulgarians organized medical posts, transported the wounded in ox carts under Turkish fire, and showed the hidden routes along which Osman Pasha received reinforcements. The Battle of Ivanovo was part of the large-scale offensive of the Eastern Detachment, whose goal was to paralyze the Turkish forces in the direction of Rus.
During the battle, the Russian regiments successfully captured the heavily fortified Turkish positions on the heights near the village, using precise artillery fire and bayonet attacks.
This success ensured strategic control and cut off the Ottoman command and No. 39's ability to send reinforcements to the besieged Pleven. Meanwhile, General Gurko and #39's vanguard triumphantly enters Thrace. On the 22nd of July, Stara Zagora wakes up free. The celebrations are indescribable. The streets are covered with flowers, and the church bells ring for the first time in centuries without fear. But the joy proved short-lived. From the south, with logistical support from the British Navy, Suleiman Pasha and No. 39's elite 30,000-strong army was quickly transferred from Montenegro. On July 31st, the epic Battle of Stara Zagora broke out. Only 4,500 Russian soldiers and 4 battalions of Bulgarian volunteers stood against the overwhelming Turkish superiority. This was the baptism of fire of the Samara banner. In the fierce battle to save the sacred banner, 5 banner bearers fell one after another, among them Lieutenant Colonel Pavel Halitin. Pierced and mortally wounded, he falls from his horse and calls out to the militia to protect the flag and move forward. His body falls onto the flag and protects it for precious seconds until volunteers manage to pull him out. Despite the heroism shown and the successful actions near Nova Zagora, the strategic situation became critical. To save the army from encirclement, General Gurko made the difficult but necessary decision to retreat north to the rocks of the Shipka Pass. Nikola Korchev remains in the national memory as the giant who, during the bloody Battle of Stara Zagora, saved the Samara flag from capture, grabbing it from the enemy at the moment when Halitin fell, and defended it until his last breath. He bears the dignity of the last standard-bearer, a symbol of the indomitable will of the people who refuse to see their sacred icon thrown into the mud. But after the retreat of the Russian troops, the wrath of Suleiman Pasha fell upon Stara Zagora. The city turned into a fiery hell. Within 3 days, over 14,500 Bulgarian civilians, men, women, and children, were massacred. Thousands were burned alive in the Church of the Holy Virgin, and the city, called the Pearl of Thrace, was razed to the ground. The statistics are horrifying. Out of 3,000 houses, only 20 survived. Stara Zagora became a symbol of one of the greatest massacres in modern Bulgarian history, paying the price of its short-lived longing for freedom with ashes. The tragedy did not stop at the city limits. After the retreat of the Russian vanguard units, the entire Thracian valley and the foothills were drenched in blood. Kazanlak, Karlovo, and Sopot were subjected to systematic destruction. Over 200 villages were burned down, and the number of victims in the region exceeded 30,000 people. The Valley of Roses becomes the Valley of Death, leaving behind thousands of dead and refugees. High above the black smoke in the valley, among the rocks of the Shipka Pass, Russian forces face an almost impossible task. Facing Suleiman Pasha and No. 39's elite 28,000-strong army with 54 cannons are only 7,500 defenders, Russian soldiers from the Oriel Regiment and 5 battalions of Bulgarian volunteers. The order is clear, not a step back. From the 21st to the 26th of August, incessant battles raged. On the most critical day, the 23rd of August, the Turkish attacks reached 12 in number. Over 200,000 bullets were fired. When ammunition began to run out, the defenders repelled the enemy with stones and even the bodies of their fallen comrades.
The local population of Gabrovo and the surrounding villages became the living rear of the defense.
Over 3,000 volunteers, including women and children, climbed the steep slopes every day under a hail of bullets to deliver water and food to the positions. Gabrovo craftsmen organized round-the-clock workshops to repair hundreds of rifles. The strategic importance of this success was enormous. The arrival of General Radetzky and No. 39's reinforcements at the last moment saved the pass and predetermined the outcome of the war. Süleyman Pasha lost 6,700 men and was forced to go on the defensive. Shipka became an impregnable fortress, which pressed the Turkish forces south of the Balkans and allowed the Russian command to complete the siege of Pleven. Yet the situation at Shipka remains complicated, and clouds are gathering in the east. To reinforce the fortified quadrilateral, the Ottoman command used the strategic Varna-Rus railway line to quickly deploy over 30,000 elite soldiers and huge quantities of provisions, delivered by sea from Istanbul. This logistical maneuverability allowed Mehmed Ali Pasha to concentrate significant forces against the Russian Eastern Detachment and take offensive action. The Turks won two important victories at Kara-Hasankaya and Ablanovo. The situation on the Eastern Front also became critical. At this tense moment, September 11th, the name day of Emperor Alexander II, became a black day for Russian weapons. The third assault on Pleven began in the afternoon under heavy rain and thick fog, turning the battlefield into a mud trap. Against Osman Pasha and No. 39's elite 34,000-strong army, fortified in a massive system of over 40 fortifications around 16 key redoubts with 72 cannons, the Allies threw a huge force. 75,000 Russian soldiers and 30,000 Romanian soldiers, supported by 424 guns. During 4 days of artillery preparation before the assault, over 30,000 shells were fired. In the heart of hell, at the Grevski Redoubt, the 3rd Battalion of the Finnish Guards Rifle Regiment gained immortal glory. Under the murderous fire of rapid-fire rifles, they did not break formation, losing a fifth of their personnel in just 1 hour. Their marching song later became a national symbol in Finland. The Romanian army, under the personal command of Prince Carol, attacked the redoubt with unprecedented fury. The Romanians suffered nearly 3,000 casualties, killed and wounded, and tens of thousands of sick later. General Tutman and #39's Cossacks operated on the flanks, carrying out suicidal cavalry attacks to cut off Pleven and #39's communications with Sofia, losing hundreds of riders and horses under fire from the Turkish infantry. By the end of the day, the losses were staggering. Over 16,000 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded, compared to about 3,000 for the defenders. By the evening of the next day, the operational situation became critical for the entire Russian campaign. To the east, the Turks were gaining strategic successes at Kara-Hasankaya and Ablanovo, threatening the supply lines along the Danube. To the south, the defense of Shipka was holding at the limit of human endurance against the attacks of Soliman Pasha, and to the west, the Pleven knot remained untied. Freedom seems further away than ever as the war enters its darkest and most exhausting phase. After the massacre of September 11th, the Russian command stopped the bloody attacks. On September 16th, the legendary engineer from Sevastopol, General Edward Totleben, arrived in the Pleven sector. His diagnosis is categorical. Pleven cannot be taken with blood. It must be taken with hunger. Totleben immediately ordered a complete blockade. Under his leadership, thousands of sappers built a siege line about 50 kilometers long, divided into 6 sectors. To cut off supplies from Sofia, he sent Gurko and #39's army to capture the fortifications at Gornji Dubnik and Talish. Thus, the 43,000th garrison of Osman Pasha was isolated in an iron grip. Tottleben also built high observation towers equipped with powerful optics from which Russian officers monitored every movement in the Turkish redoubts.
Inside the city, hunger became indescribable. The rations of the Turkish soldiers were reduced to a small piece of bread made from corn and straw. Almost all the horses and pack animals were eaten. On December 10, 1877, Osman Pasha made a desperate attempt to break through.
The Turkish troops, accompanied by a huge refugee column, attacked the positions of the Russian Grenadier Corps, but they were swept away by the fire of 77 Russian guns. Wounded in the leg, Ghazi Osman Pasha surrenders and hands his sword to Colonel Ganetsky.
10 pashas, over 2,000 officers, and more than 41,000 soldiers were captured.
The fall of Pleven freed a huge Russian army and broke the morale of the Ottoman Empire. At the same time, near the village of Mechka, one of the most important defensive operations of the Eastern Detachment was taking place. There, the 12th Army Corps managed to repel the massive offensives of Mehmed Ali Pasha and No. 39's 30,000-strong army. The Russian regiments, despite the numerical superiority of the enemy, launched a daring counterattack with bayonets, which forced the Ottoman forces to retreat in panic. After the main problems in the east and west were resolved, the Russian command made the bold decision not to wait for spring, but to cross the Balkans in the harshest winter of the century. The world is shocked. European military experts predict doom for the army in the ice. Temperatures drop to -20 degrees, and the snow cover in places exceeds 2 meters. Roads are practically non-existent. Cannons weighing tons are dismantled and dragged by hand by soldiers across ravines, while the snow blinds and freezes all movement. In this superhuman crossing, the decisive role fell to the Bulgarian helpers. Without the knowledge and sacrifice of the local population, the Balkans would have become a graveyard for the Russian regiments.
Thousands of Bulgarians from Koprivshtitsa, Troyan, Etro, Pole, and dozens of mountain villages joined in clearing the paths. Knowing every rock, they led the columns of Gurko and Skobelev through passes considered impassable.
The Bulgarians not only show the way, they harness their own oxen, carry provisions on their backs, and organize food points in the most inaccessible places. This national support gave wings to the liberators. Overcoming the Balkan mountains became a psychological weapon that finally paralyzed the Ottoman command. The Turks did not believe that it was possible for an army to survive in the icy hell. While the brief reports from General Radetzky arrive at headquarters and report that Shipka is calm, behind these words lies the silent tragedy of thousands of soldiers. In the December blizzards, the Russian patrols on the summit literally turn into ice statues. In just a few weeks, the number of frostbitten and sick people reached a staggering 9,000 people. The victims of the so-called White Death in these months of positional waiting exceeded the losses from direct combat, turning Shipka into a monument to silent suffering. On January 4, 1878, General Gurko and #39's troops triumphantly entered Sofia after a daring winter crossing forced the Ottoman forces to abandon their positions to avoid complete encirclement. The city was saved from planned destruction thanks to the firm intervention of the foreign consuls Leander Lej and Vito Positano, who refused to leave their homes and forced the Turkish command to cancel the order for destruction. The first free prayer service is held in the Cathedral of St. Nedelya, marking the end of 5 centuries of Ottoman rule in the heart of Bulgarian lands.
Gurko then divided his detachment into 3 columns and advanced into the Thracian plain. Meanwhile, the Romanian army carried out a heroic attack on the fortified villages of Sracan and Inovo near Vidin. The Romanians took the positions with a bayonet charge, leading to a complete blockade of the Vidin fortress. On January 9th, one of the last major battles took place in the fields near Shainovo. The Russian columns of General Skobelev and Prince Sviatopolk Mirsky, after a winter crossing through the passes, closed the encirclement around the central Turkish army. In a decisive bayonet attack, Russian soldiers and Bulgarian volunteers smashed Vaisel Pasha and No. 39's camp, capturing over 22,000 soldiers and 93 cannons. The captured Pasha surrenders his sword, acknowledging the complete defeat of the Ottoman defenses south of the Balkans. Russian military leaders are amazed to recognize the crucial role of the Bulgarian population in the nutrition and logistics of the Russian army. Emperor Alexander II himself wrote to the Empress that the Bulgarians welcomed them as liberators with indescribable enthusiasm and brought them everything they had: bread, wine, and fruit. He admits that without their help, feeding the army in these wild and desolate mountains would have been impossible. On January 14th, General Nikolai Brock entered Pazardzhik, where Bulgarian volunteers extinguished the fuses of the Turkish gunpowder warehouses at the last moment and saved the city from destruction. After the liberation of Pazardzhik, Russian units made a daring night crossing through the icy waters of the Maritsa River to cut off Suleiman Pasha and No. 39's retreat to Plovdiv. Hours before the arrival of the liberators, however, one of the darkest tragedies of the war took place in the Ostromila area. 80 Bulgarian prisoners were brutally murdered. Taken out of Tsapia prison in the middle of the night, they were shot and hacked to death with impotent fury by retreating Bashiboju units. This massacre remains in history as one of the deepest wounds on the body of the resurgent Plovdiv. In the decisive battle for the city between January 15th and 17th, General Gurko attacked from 3 sides. Captain Alexander Barago and his squadron carried out a legendary reconnaissance that drove away the Turkish headquarters and saved the city from burning. After the defeat of Suleiman Pasha and No. 39's 30,000-strong army, the road to Edirne and Constantinople was open. After the liberation of Plovdiv, Russian troops advanced with lightning speed and entered Edirne on January 20th without a fight, after the Ottoman garrison abandoned the second most important fortress of the empire. From here, the Russian vanguards continued their unstoppable march south and east, reaching the shores of the Sea of Marmara at the village of San Stefano just a few days later, just a few kilometers from the domes of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. The panic in the Ottoman capital and the success of the Russian army forced Britain to act decisively. London sends a powerful squadron of battleships to demonstrate strength and stop the Russian advance on Constantinople. The world faces the danger of a major European conflict. This led to the signing of the Armistice of Adrianople on January 31st, officially ending hostilities. The climax came on March 3, 1878, when the preliminary peace treaty of San Stefano was signed, ending 5 centuries of Ottoman rule. The date was not chosen by chance. It is the anniversary of the accession of Emperor Alexander II to the throne and the day of the abolition of serfdom in Russia, for which he was called the Tsar Liberator. The document restored Bulgaria as an autonomous principality, encompassing almost all lands inhabited by Bulgarians, from the Danube to the White Sea, and from the Black Sea to Ohrid. The Peace of San Stefano remains in history as the act that returned Bulgaria to the map of Europe and laid the foundations of modern Bulgarian statehood.